It was the exact moment Eleanor noticed a child's single shoe lying at the base of a rusty slide that her world tilted on its axis. Her heart thudded so loudly she couldn't hear anything else. Not the wind that rattled the chain-link fence surrounding the playground. Not the distant hum of traffic back in town. She clutched a torn scrap of bright yellow fabric in her hand. The piece she'd found snagged on a jagged bit of metal near the swings. It looked suspiciously like part of Olivia's jacket. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead. The sun had nearly set, and the abandoned park was bathed in the kind of twilight that made familiar shapes turn sinister. Somewhere deep in the unkempt trees, she was sure she heard a whimper. Or maybe it was just the wind. "Olivia?" she called, her voice catching in her throat. She took a trembling step toward the noise, scanning the crooked silhouettes of the old playground equipment. She could feel something terrible in the air, a pressure bearing down on her from all sides. The slides, the seesaws, the broken carousel, each looked like a monster, crouching in the half-light. She forced her fear aside, trying to steady her breathing. There was no time for panic. She had to be strong for her daughter. A metallic creak echoed through the park, and she jerked around to see a swing moving, apparently on its own. Then a shape flickered at the far edge of her peripheral vision. Someone tall, lurking by the crumbling storage shed. With her heart hammering and her palms wet with sweat, she shouted Olivia's name again, but there was no answer except the squeaking chains and the rush of the wind. 3 days earlier, none of this had even been a possibility in Eleanor's mind. She had come back to Westbridge, her hometown, hoping to mend old wounds, settle her late mother's affairs, and give her 8-year-old daughter, Olivia, a quiet place to grow up. The past year had been brutal for them both. A failed marriage, money problems, and an ever-present grief that clung to every breath she took. But Westbridge was supposed to be a fresh start. The trouble began almost as soon as she'd arrived. Friends she hadn't seen in years stopped by unannounced, dropping subtle hints about how the town had changed. People no longer used the old park for anything more than a shortcut or the occasional teenage dare. And there were rumors, unpleasant ones, about children going missing or hearing strange cries late at night. Of course, no one had concrete evidence, just hushed gossip. Eleanor tried to ignore these stories. She chalked them up to small-town superstition or exaggerations meant to scare kids away from a dangerous, run-down place. She had her own more pressing worries. The stack of bills that had followed her even here. The swirling memories of her mother's funeral. The job she desperately needed to find. At the same time, Olivia, who'd always been curious and fearless, began talking about the photos she'd found in the attic of Eleanor as a child, swinging in that very same park. "Mom, why doesn't anyone go there anymore?" Olivia had asked, eyes bright with fascination. Eleanor hadn't known quite what to say. She only warned her, "It's not safe now. The equipment is old, broken. Promise me you won't go there without me." Olivia had promised, crossed her heart. But promises can be forgotten, especially by an adventurous 8-year-old, entranced by images of a once vibrant playground where her own mother had played. The first day of school in Westbridge came and went smoothly enough. Olivia was an easy child to please. She liked drawing, reading, and climbing trees. But the second day, Eleanor sensed a shift in her daughter's mood. Olivia kept asking about that park, pressing for more details, and Eleanor continually changed the subject. Later that afternoon, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Carter wandered by with a tray of cookies, wearing a worried expression. "I heard you mention the old park to your daughter," she said, offering Eleanor a cookie. "You tell her to stay away from there, you hear?" When Eleanor asked why, The old woman only shook her head. Strange things happen. Folks around here say there's someone or something lurking there, especially at dusk. Eleanor tried to laugh it off, but Mrs. Carter's grave stare made her uneasy. After the neighbor left, she caught Olivia peeking from around the corner, silently taking in the warning. On the third day, it happened. Eleanor was in the kitchen, rummaging through a tattered file of old utility bills, lost in frustration. She'd told Olivia to stay in the backyard, within sight of the kitchen window, but a phone call came, a former employer, wanting her back for a short contract. She was on the phone longer than she realized, negotiating pay, explaining her new circumstances. By the time she hung up, the backyard was quiet, and Olivia was nowhere to be seen. At first, Eleanor fought down her rising panic. Maybe Olivia had just gone inside to use the bathroom. But a frantic search through every room of the house turned up nothing. The neighbor outside, mowing his lawn, said he hadn't noticed anything. That's when she remembered the photo of the park. A sick certainty settled in her gut. By the time she arrived, the late afternoon sun was dipping behind the treetops. The sign reading Rosewood Park hung crooked, the paint peeling so badly it was barely legible. She called for Olivia again and again, her voice echoing back from the rusted swings. Nothing. She circled the area, stepping over broken glass and bits of twisted metal. A sense of dread seeped into her bones. She found no footprints, no jacket tossed aside, no sign that Olivia had come this way at all, except a small indentation in the grass near the swings that might have been a child's footprint. Desperate, she was about to run to the police station when she spotted Andrew Reed, lurking by an old picnic table. He claimed to live on the far edge of town, said he'd just stopped by to see the place he used to visit as a teen. His eyes were shifty, too nervous, and his explanations felt half-formed, but he swore he'd seen a little girl about an hour ago, near the swings. That was enough to keep Eleanor there, searching with renewed urgency. In the distance, she heard the faint crunch of leaves. Racing toward the sound, she nearly stumbled over a hidden depression in the ground that led to a small cement structure, possibly an old storage cellar. The heavy metal door stood slightly ajar, squeaking on its hinges in the breeze. Inside, it was too dark to see. Her flashlight from the car was left behind in her frantic haste, so she used her phone's flashlight. She hesitated at the threshold, fear swirling in her stomach. What if Olivia was inside? What if something or someone else was too? Pushing aside her terror, Eleanor crept forward, shining the phone's weak beam on crumbling walls. She saw debris, some rotted cardboard boxes, a broken tricycle. A child's voice seemed to whisper her name, but she couldn't tell if it was real or just her imagination. Then came a sound that froze her, a scraping, like someone shifting metal across concrete. She whirled around to see Andrew Reed standing in the doorway, blocking the light. He looked startled himself, as though he hadn't expected her to go in. I heard something, he stammered, stepping aside. When she emerged from the cellar, her hands were shaking, and she forced Andrew to tell her everything he knew. He insisted he'd only seen a girl enter the park and then run off. His story didn't add up. He'd first said she ran toward the picnic tables. Now he was saying she went to the cellar. Something about him felt off, but there was no time to argue. They searched together, yelling Olivia's name, scouring every inch of the grounds until the sun sank completely. That was when Eleanor found the shoe at the base of the slide. A wave of nausea nearly overwhelmed her. She picked it up, recognizing it as Olivia's. If there had been any doubt, it was gone now. Her daughter was here, or at least she had been, and something had gone terribly wrong. The sound of a distant cry came from somewhere near the tall oak trees on the western edge of the park. Eleanor's head snapped in that direction. "Stay here," she barked at Andrew. She wasn't sure why she didn't trust him, but everything about this situation felt wrong. Heart pounding, she clutched the shoe and sprinted toward the trees. Under the gnarled branches, darkness fell heavily, and the ground was uneven, with roots and piles of dead leaves. She searched frantically, shining her phone's light in shaky arcs. Then she saw it. A small scrap of what looked like bright yellow fabric caught on a low-hanging branch. Olivia's jacket. She snatched it, holding it up to confirm. A hush settled over the place, as though even the crickets had gone silent. A rustle behind her made her spin. Standing a few yards away was Andrew again. His eyes glinted strangely in the dim light. He took a step forward, arms raised as if in surrender. But Eleanor's heart hammered in suspicion. Something about his presence felt predatory, like a wolf trying to look harmless. Before she could demand an explanation, a sudden cry echoed from the other side of the park, near the fence. She dashed off, ignoring Andrew's calls to wait. Gasping for breath, she reached the fence line, scanning the darkness. Nothing. No child, no sign of movement. Had she only imagined it? Her nerves were frayed, exhaustion tugging at her every limb. That was when she realized she couldn't see Andrew anymore. The park was silent again, except for the groan of rusted metal and the whisper of wind through dead leaves. Her phone's battery icon flashed a warning. Sinking to her knees for a moment, she tried to gather her thoughts. She couldn't lose herself to panic. She had to find Olivia. The next 20 minutes felt like a feverish nightmare. She ran back and forth between the trees, the slide, the abandoned bathrooms, the crooked sandbox. Anywhere a frightened child might hide. Fear gnawed at her, fueled by the memory of Andrew's suspicious demeanor. She wondered if she should run for the police, but leaving the park felt like abandoning Olivia, who might be calling out for her just around the next corner. Suddenly, Andrew reappeared, breathing heavily, claiming he'd heard a voice coming from the dilapidated shed. Against her better judgment, she followed him, shining the phone's weakening beam onto the crumbling walls. An old door in the rear creaked open at a slight push, revealing a narrow corridor that smelled of damp earth and decay. Something about the structure felt older than the rest of the park, as if it predated the playground. A single flickering light bulb dangled at the end of the corridor, casting shadows that seemed to shift and twist like living things. Eleanor pressed a hand against her racing heart, stepping carefully. "Olivia?" she whispered. A faint scraping noise answered her, coming from behind a half-collapsed storage cabinet. Andrew moved closer, but Eleanor stopped him. With trembling hands, she pulled the cabinet aside. There, curled up on the filthy floor, was Olivia, eyes wide with terror, clothes smeared with dirt. Eleanor fell to her knees, pulling her daughter into her arms, relief flooding her so intensely she nearly sobbed. "Mommy," Olivia croaked, shaking from head to toe. He said you were here too." Eleanor looked over her shoulder at Andrew, who was standing behind them, a strange expression on his face. For a moment, 1,000 questions rushed through her mind. Did Andrew lead her here? Or was he the reason Olivia was trapped? Something glinted in his hand, a small flashlight, or was it something else? He looked pale, or maybe that was the flickering light playing tricks. Eleanor helped Olivia to her feet. "It's okay, baby. I've got you," she whispered, holding her close. Then she glared at Andrew. "What happened? Why is she here?" Andrew stuttered, saying he'd found Olivia wandering outside the shed. He claimed she got scared and ran in, that he had only been trying to help. But Olivia's tear-streaked face and terrified eyes told a different story. Andrew's words sounded rehearsed, forced. Olivia clung to her mother's jacket, too frightened to speak. A terrible suspicion took root in Eleanor's mind. Andrew was more than just a concerned bystander. She sensed betrayal, something dark in his gaze that he tried to mask with concern. "We need to get out of here," Eleanor said hoarsely, ushering Olivia toward the doorway. Andrew blocked their path, insisting he should go first. For a moment, Eleanor thought he was about to grab her wrist or slam the door shut. Then a noise from outside startled them both, a siren wailing in the distance, or maybe a car horn. Andrew froze, giving Eleanor the chance to dart around him and pull her daughter into the open air. The night seemed somehow brighter after the suffocating darkness of that corridor. Eleanor's lungs filled with crisp air, and she squeezed Olivia's hand, guiding her toward the exit. Andrew lingered behind, murmuring something about just wanting to help. But Eleanor wasn't about to take any more chances. They emerged near the old swings, the same spot where Eleanor had first seen Olivia's shoe. Olivia was limping slightly, favoring her left foot, but she was alive and relatively unharmed. The shoe on her right foot was gone, and her jacket sleeve was torn. Before Eleanor could confront Andrew again, he disappeared into the shadows. She looked around but saw only the silhouettes of twisted metal and dead trees. With Olivia safe in her arms, she made her way back to the car as quickly as she could. The entire time, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them from behind the broken fence. Once in the car, Eleanor locked the doors and started the engine. Olivia was trembling so hard that she could barely buckle her seatbelt. Eleanor held her close, tears of relief and lingering fear dampening her own cheeks. As she pulled away, her headlights swept across the park's dilapidated entrance. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw Andrew standing by the crooked sign, watching them leave with an unreadable expression. Then darkness reclaimed him. It took a while for Olivia to speak. At first, all she could do was cry. Eleanor stroked her hair, whispering that she was safe, that everything would be okay now. Slowly, between sobs, Olivia mumbled about following a stranger who said he knew her mother. She talked about how he lured her deeper into the park, promising a surprise, but then became angry when she got scared. She ran away and found that corridor, hiding until her mother arrived. Eleanor shuddered at the realization of how close she'd come to losing her daughter. There had always been rumors, whispers of a strange presence in the old park, but she never expected a real person to take advantage of that place's isolation to prey on a child. She felt a cocktail of fury and guilt rise within her, for not believing the warnings, for letting Olivia's curiosity slip past her watch. When she finally got home, she called the police. Officers came, took statements, and went searching for any sign of Andrew Reed. They found footprints, an old flashlight, even that piece of yellow fabric Eleanor had dropped. But Andrew had vanished, and so had any clear evidence pointing to who he really was or what he intended. Olivia clung to Eleanor for days after, refusing to sleep in her own bed. The nightmares were constant. She'd wake up screaming about being locked in a dark place, about someone standing over her. Eleanor tried to be strong, to reassure her that the park was off limits forever, that the police would find the man who hurt her. But a part of her suspected that Westbridge's hidden shadows went deeper than a single criminal. That suspicion became even stronger when an anonymous note appeared on Eleanor's doorstep a week later. It read, in shaky handwriting, "Rosewood Park is not what it seems. Stay away, or the next time, no one will hear the screams." A chill ran down her spine. She burned the note, but the words stayed with her, lodged in her mind like a barb. And so, the question of betrayal lingered. Did Andrew conspire with someone else? Was he truly a lone predator, or a pawn of something more sinister? that lurked in that abandoned playground. Olivia continued to heal, slowly regaining her courage, but the memory of that awful evening would never fully leave them. Some nights, Eleanor found herself staring at the same photograph that had sparked Olivia's curiosity, a younger version of herself, smiling in that very park. She wondered how a place, once filled with childhood laughter, could become twisted by darkness. She also wondered if she had truly escaped that night, or if the same evil still watched her from a distance, waiting for another chance. Time would pass. The police investigation would turn up half answers and unverified leads. Some folks in town claimed Andrew Reed was just an alias, that no such person existed in any official records. Others thought he must be a drifter, someone who came and went with the wind. Then there were the old-timers who swore the park was cursed long before Andrew Reed ever showed up. Eleanor didn't know which to believe. All she could do was hold Olivia close and promise they'd stick together, no matter what. Even as the leaves turned to gold and the air grew colder, a subtle dread remained. Every now and then, in the quiet hours before dawn, Eleanor would wake up to the echo of that rusty swing, squeaking as if a phantom child were playing there, alone. And in those moments, she'd reach for Olivia's hand, reassuring herself that her daughter was safe at home. Yet, deep down, she couldn't forget the hush that fell when she stood in the park at twilight, or the way Andrew's eyes glinted under that flickering streetlight. She couldn't shake the haunting sense that there were more secrets buried in the cracked pavement and overgrown weeds of Rosewood Park than anyone cared to admit. Perhaps one day, those secrets would resurface, torn scraps of yellow fabric, a single shoe, an echoing cry, reminders that some places simply refuse to let the past go. Even after all the horror, betrayal, and fear, Eleanor would sometimes stand by her window at night, gazing toward the distant silhouette of the abandoned park. She wouldn't let Olivia see, wouldn't let the child sense her lingering unease. But in her heart, she knew that what happened there had changed them both forever. The best she could do was keep her daughter safe, love her fiercely, and hope that whatever dark presence haunted that playground had receded back into its shadows, for now. Because if she had learned anything from that fateful evening, it was this: evil doesn't always live in haunted houses or ghost stories. Sometimes it hides behind friendly smiles and polite conversations, waiting patiently for a moment of vulnerability to strike. And sometimes a place can hold memories, both good and bad, like echoes in the air, refusing to let them die.